Well, good morning, everyone. Bill Correll here with my longtime co-host and good friend, Ken Caputo, and we are lighting the candle, and we are, causing with our conversations, and we are bringing into existence a world that works. So, lots been going on all over the place. I, for one, have not watched a news broadcast or much media stuff at all for several months. And so I'm not interested in all of that. But I had an interesting conversation with an old friend while I was traveling down here. And we spent a good bit of time talking about two old saws. And again, I want to offer this up because we don't get into this kind of stuff very often. But one is absence makes the heart grow fonder. And then the other one is familiarity breeds contempt. You're familiar with both of those, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I wonder, what we do is we're really not interested in selling any point of view here. We're kind of interested in getting involved and see what dynamics are there, and how is languages kind of shaping what's going on with our environment, our friends, our culture. And the neat part of it is that at the end of the day, if you hear something that makes you feel a little bit more light in the step, have a little more pep in your step, as Mike Sexton says, and have some enjoyment, and maybe get unstuck in an area that you really weren't quite sure where your next move was. And that's really what we're here for. We want you to have a button that you can push where you're in charge of your own go. You're in charge of your own empowerment. And having said that, Ken, you want to tell people who you are a little bit, and then we'll jump right in, and you can pick either one of those to start with if it works for you.
Sure. That's an interesting one. So yeah, Ken Caputo, founder of Quester's Way, and just interested in all things meaningful human connection, empowered learning, and joy in the present moment. That's enough.
Sure.
So yeah, so that's kind of, those are interesting ones. So absence makes the heart grow fonder. So there's a Buddhist term, impermanence, and it's all about the fact that nothing lasts. Everything. It's the cup I'm drinking from right now is actually a broken cup. It's just not broken in this present moment, but eventually, it will be. So to me, that's the interesting thing about that comment is, which perspective are you seeing it from? Are you seeing it from being jarred into remembering the value of something because it's now gone? Or are you living with the recognition that it has value because it's there presently and someday may be gone?
Yeah.
And and the interesting thing is, the practice of, for myself, living kind of an essentialist, a minimalist lifestyle as best I can, and just appreciating my health when I have it. And of course there's, as that changes, or you get hurt or you get sick or whatever, you miss it. People come and go in your life.
Sure.
But I think I'd rather be fond of it now because it will be absent eventually. So
that's an interesting perspective. And for somebody who is well grounded in being present and mindful, and can actually focus on what the here and now has to offer, that would be a really appropriate way for you to answer the question. I think, in my history, my mom used to say that an awful lot. And for the first probably 2 years of her marriage, with me as a small baby, my dad was overseas in the Air Force, being trained at an Air Force base just off of the coast of Africa near Morocco. And she would always talk about, how when he was gone, all she could ever remember was all the things that were really great about him that, she absolutely couldn't wait to see again, and she missed him terribly. And the other part of it was that when we moved away from Denver the first time, it was kind of her first time away from her family. She had 7 brothers and sisters, 1 brother and 6 sisters, and it literally was the longest distance they'd ever been apart from each other. So, all those times, what she found is that the telephone calls made all the difference. And I have one more story to share with you. I had a roommate in university. I went to the University of Colorado as a freshman, and I had a roommate who, for some reason, he decided he was going to call this girl that he knew from high school. And all of a sudden, I mean, the guy's on the phone with this girl who was still in California where they both lived. And first it started out with 15 to 20-minute calls, and then it was an hour, and then it was 2 hours. Now, mind you, a phone call in those days was not like free. You know, we live
Right. Yeah.
we live in an age where you pay a monthly bill, and I personally can call anywhere in North America at no extra charge, right? And the call can be as long as we want it to be, and all that other good stuff. Well, in those days, an hour-long call was, I don't know, $30, or something outrageous like that. So what he did over a period of time is he could barely describe what this girl looked like. However, he fell in love with her voice over the phone. And if they went more than 2 days without speaking to each other on the phone, he would get very upset. So in
Mm.
terms of the topic of absence making the heart grow fonder, that one kind of really drove it home for me. I actually saw somebody who developed a fantasy relationship with some girl at the other end of the line. And this is long before you could dial up and have women talk to you for $3.99 a minute. It just was that kind of a connection. And I asked him after he had gone home for Christmas break, right? When we got back together in January, I said, "So did you meet up with this gal you've been talking to?" And his highest bill one month, I think, was $700. I have no idea how he paid that in 1972 dollars, but his highest phone bill was $700. Now, it only cost $4,000 a year to go to the University of Colorado. That'll put it into perspective for you.
Mhm.
So, going back to the story, he gets back in January, and I ask him, "So how did it go? Are you guys like getting married or something?" He said, "No, we met in person. It didn't work." One and done. And I said, "You're still paying for your phone bill, aren't you?" "Yeah, we are, and my line's been disconnected and all that good stuff." So living in the moment, that's really all he could do. But those kind of extremes, absence makes the heart grow fonder. What does that mean to you at home that are listening in? So any thoughts come to mind, Ken?
Well, the other thing is just what a good teacher it can be, so because it's so easy to just forget to appreciate what's around us. I mean, we can't hold that all the time. I mean, that was one of my favorite quotes. Someone asked the Dalai Lama once, "Are you enlightened?" And he said his answer was not at the moment. you know, it's like, okay, good. Yeah. But yeah, so it's interesting, when you recognize an absence and it gives you that moment where you can stop and reflect on the value that it has. Now you have a different, just kind of renews your appreciation or gratitude for what you have. So yeah, I mean, I kind of see it as just a positive thing that can also serve as sort of an admonishment, or just a way to get you to stop and think for a minute, and Thich Nhat Hanh is funny. This kind of pulled me into a lot of the Eastern people, I guess. But he talks about non-toothache, and the fact that you don't think about your teeth when you don't have a toothache,
Right.
and maybe you should, and just value the fact that your teeth don't hurt, that they're, so it's like so often. It's funny. I was just interviewing someone yesterday about, they go way back with media. They're in radio and, they did news for a long time through decades. And they were saying that, one of the things they learned early on was no one wants to hear about the thousands of planes that land successfully. They want to hear about the one that crashed, and that's newsworthy. So, so isn't it interesting that we're almost by nature, we have to be vigilant about the things that spark fear or alarm, because we have to recognize that our nervous system has to respond to that, but it can pull us into a state that can be intentionally or unintentionally reinforced by, media or, people in our circle, whatever. So it's just kind of an interesting thing. I think that's a good saying if you're willing to look at it through a few different lenses and see the value that it can have in your day-to-day life.
Completely agree. And here's the other thing, the cool part of it is we're often drawn to saying is that any and every moment has myriad possibilities of experiencing it. There are endless possibilities. There's, as Deepak Chopra would say, they fall into the field of all possibilities. So the really cool thing about a positive statement, or whether or not it's true, if it is, there are people who you don't become fonder of, or places that you don't become fonder of once they're away from you or you're away from them. And I think our language is idiomatic for all of these brief sayings that someone picked up, and then they found they were useful, for presencing something in other conversations. And I think this is one of those. This would be someone, in one of the courses that I did at some point, said, I want you to think about your significant other, your partner, your mate. Now I want you to write down on the left-hand side of a tea table all of the things that you love about them. Okay, so right. Okay, everyone done? Good. So now on the right-hand side of the tea table, I want you to write down all of the things about them that you're not quite so much in love with, okay? Annoying little this, that, and the other thing, and right. So when we get done, he says, now, which of the two people that you've just written about do you most appreciate? And so somebody put their hand in the air, and they were very, very quick to say, well, obviously, I like the things I like about them. And he said, that's very good. And do you always live with that person? And the guy said, well, I always do. However, when they're doing the things on the right-hand side of the tea table, I'd rather not in some of these cases. I'd rather be anywhere else but right there, give me a break. And he said, the man at the front of the room said, well, tell me how you get that person to be the left-hand column all the time. Dead silence. I mean, literally for 30 seconds, pregnant pause, right? And finally, somebody said, what if they're not any of those things at all? What if that's just our perception and our idea of who they are? And this just goes back to that thing that we say over and over and over again. What choice do you and I have in a moment to experience it differently than when it's giving us pain or sorrow or grief, if we don't want to do that? And what moments do we have, like there's just way too much joy? Have you ever been in one of those situations that it actually makes you feel nervous, a little self-conscious, like it's just an abundance of riches that's hard to like really be with and stand right there for a long period of time? I have. Yep. In 2 or 3 different instances. Usually they were being, when I was being trotted out in front of public as somebody who you need to be like, it's like, wait a minute, I don't think so. You talking about me, But when you get right down to it, the things on the left-hand side of the table are, in many cases, those things that we talk about, and we tell people about when they get back. I can't wait to do this. I really miss this. And in many cases, I think we're taught that it's bad to say bad things about people that are not present. You and I were raised that way, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think there are other quarters where that's when you really tee the ball up and hit it as far as you can. I am so glad that sack of what is no longer around here, because if he were, I would be ripping him up one side and down the other.
Yeah.
So the whole idea of any of these, like, would we call these aphorisms? Would we call these, the idioms of our language? We string words together and they presence a feeling, and then other people, we never know what feeling they get when they hear absence makes the heart grow fonder. And kind of that said, it does if it does. Not necessarily that it just always does.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting in a way. There, I mean, it's almost like you embrace it sort of like a mantra. you
Yes.
know you can, if I remember I had one that was during a difficult time in my life, and it was just life falls away. And it was just kind of something I would say to myself. I didn't really share it with anyone else. And it was recognizing that there was a lot of loss occurring, that I was powerless to stop. And it was just kind of this, recognition and acceptance. And, things were becoming absent sort of at an alarming rate. Some of them that, I hadn't really considered could become absent. So, and I mean, and it's funny, I didn't share that, but if I had been a author who wrote about that, maybe that was a phrase that other people would have picked up. And in the process of picking up, they probably would have interpreted it in a way that was relevant to their personal experience, which was probably different from the way that I was using it. You know, So it was actually, for me, it was kind of a stoic thing. I was, going back and reading a lot of Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, and it was just helping me. So, but yeah, so isn't it interesting how it's partially how the words get strung together, but more importantly, it's the view that we adopt for those words. And I guess the real question is it serving you? Is it serving you in a way that helps you maintain, some semblance of balance in your life,
Yeah.
you know?
It's perfect. And in many cases, in order to relate to people, we resort to cliche, we resort to short rejoinders. And for instance, if I say, "Where's the beef?" Or, let me see, um, um, "You don't have to run through airports anymore." Or, um, you know, "You're really thinking outside the box." Each one of those things has worked its way into our culture. And now, if you say any of those things in the, presence of other people, they don't know what you're talking about. But it's shorthand for an experience that those who share of us shared it can immediately relate to on some level. And it's a very similar thing to if you happen to be in a room full of adults, especially adults of teenage children age, and you just look out across the expanse of those shiny, happy faces, and you just say, "Teenagers." You get nervous laughter, you get heads bobbing up and down, and that's all you need to say. You've immediately set the stage for what comes next. Like a half hour's worth of descriptive uh, communication could not do a better job than just saying, "Teenagers." And if you follow up and you say, "You know what they're like, don't you?" Oh, now you got laughter.
Yeah.
And that recognition, this dawning on everyone at the same time. Um, I mean, you can have a lot of fun and you can say, "My daughter was 14 and that was the longest 5 years of my life," you know? And all the dads with girls, especially those that had a little bit of a trying time during that period of time, immediately start nodding their head. And now we're communicating, we've created a connection. We have some intimacy created with very few words. And I think it's a powerful way for us to bring empowerment into a situation as well. Uh, you know what I mean, Ken?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And it's and it's kind of funny. I mean, like that, the way, like the context, and even like the way you said the word, teenagers, it kind of, it brings your attention to a certain element of people's experience with teenagers. And someone else could say it with a nostalgic tone, like, teenagers, and now it's going to have a wholly, completely different, you know, kind of attachment to it. So it's a very interesting thing. And, it's actually, what struck me was just the challenge right now, I think, that we face with so much of what we do being based on like text. So like a text message or an email or a social media post where you lose that context. And, I think that's why emojis are so popular, to try to, create a little bit more of a context so that you don't lose it. But you can see where it can lead to a lot of miscommunication because you don't have the presence of that tone and context to appropriately interpret what someone's actually saying. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And the neat part of it is, Ken, in a large group of people, you only need a small percentage that actually relate to what you're saying and react to it to cause the other people to automatically, without a choice, go along as well.
Yeah.
Have you ever noticed
Yeah.
that?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And have you done any public speaking? Large groups,
Yeah.
100
Yep.
people, 300 people, that kind of thing?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
If you notice that people are kind of checking their watch or doing other things, everybody who's stood in front of large groups of people has seen that, right? Where they're clearly
Mm.
paying attention to something other than you. And there's something wrong with this picture. Why? Because somebody had invited us to come there and stand at the on the podium, on a stage somewhere, and to address people and tell them stories, right, or whatever. How do you behave when you see, what kind of things do you do uh, to make the heart grow fonder while you're standing right in front of them?
Well, actually, it's kind of funny because I'll done probably a disproportionate amount of speaking in front of teenagers,
Yeah,
which can, can be, they can disengage pretty easily, especially if, it's a school function or something where they're not really that excited to be there.
sure.
So, so I recognized two things. There's I learned this with kids a lot of times. They may appear disengaged, but there's seeds being planted and they're probably hearing it in their own way. So it's less about me, feeling that they're processing, and more about my belief that they are processing, you
Yeah,
know. But then the other thing I've always done is I focus on 10%. Just if 10% is engaged, they're the ones that I kind of concentrate on. And often 10% is the tipping point. If there's less than 10%, you've got a real problem. And it may just be an unsuccessful, whatever it is, workshop or whatever. But if I can get 10%, 1 in 10, focus on them, all of a sudden the person next to them starts wondering why they're paying attention. You have that group effect. And pretty soon, you've got a larger group. I've always shared with all of our educators, to be very, very vigilant to not getting caught up in the minority who's just not going to engage. So you could have a class or a workshop or whatever, and there's the 10% that no matter how amazing it is, it's just not for them, and that's okay. Or they're not in a place where they can hear it or whatever. So it's really easy to get caught up in overcompensating and trying to, get them engaged when the majority of the people there are fine. So it's not you, it's just the space that they're in at that time. So an interesting dynamic, that you learn to play with, especially if it's like a teaching thing, not just a speaking thing.
Right.
So
Yeah. So here's what's interesting. There's the easiest way to address a large group of people is the way that college professors do. A lecture at a pace, the same one that they've done on that particular week of the calendar year. Whatever the syllabus says, they can do this forwards, backwards in their sleep. And unfortunately, they don't even care who's in their seat. They don't even care who's listening or not listening. And I sat through lectures, in halls with 350 people at engineering school. University of Colorado, your freshman year is designed to sort the weak from the herd. They just really want a 50% attrition rate in year number one. And the neat part of it was I drew on some of those experiences when I started doing a little bit of public speaking. And rather than getting shook in the moment and being concerned that people were not listening to me or understanding, I kind of took responsibility and said, maybe I'm not developing a sufficient amount of relatedness where they will like me enough to give me their attention. Now, see, they don't have to understand or like what I'm saying if they like me, okay?
right.
So the game is, as the conversation goes on and we get energy when we're standing in front of a lot of people, that 10% that you talked about gives us the courage to keep going, as opposed to saying, this ain't working, I'll see you all some other time, and what do you got? Maybe I'll come sit with you and we'll look at an empty stage or whatever. But at one point, I was in one of these situations, and it was bright light on me and very dark, out in the, I couldn't even see the cheap seats upstairs, right? And what I noticed was whatever I was saying, it was not engaging. And yes, I did have some nice people and started doing, the nonverbal head going up and down stuff. And then there were a few more that did it and all that kind of good stuff. And then all at once, I stopped speaking. And I was silent. And I counted to 20 in my head as I looked around the entire auditorium. I looked at everybody, and then I got this big grin on my face and said, 20 seconds of pure silence brought to you by your speaker. And it cracked up the entire place. So after that, whatever I said with that big grin on my face, because when they stop speaking, what is there for them to do but look up there and say, what's wrong with him? Is he having a stroke? I mean, what's the deal, And then I said, well, welcome back, everybody. I understand that why we're here today has nothing to do with what my talk is titled. We're here today to make this relevant to your lives. We're here today to give you energy to move off of. It's the same thing that this podcast is based on, Ken, isn't it? We're here to hear the sound of our own voice, each other's voice, kind of like we're creating, a modern day melody, and then the accompanying background noises and all the rest of the thing that turns it into a thing of beauty. And it's our listeners at home, the resonance with them. If you smiled at all during the last 30 minutes, that's what we're going for. That's really what we're here. So I want you to know that public speaking did not come naturally to me at all. And the first time that I stood up in front of people, I was singing in kindergarten, "All I want for Christmas is my 2 front teeth." That broke the ice for me. When people stood up after I was done, what are you going to do with a 5-year-old that has a hit on his hands? And it's just one of those happy accidents. I didn't have 2 front teeth. I lost them both at the same time, and that's why I got to sing that song. I don't even know if I could carry a tune at that point, but everyone really had a good time. So we're really just kind of stitching around the edges of happiness makes the heart grow fonder. And I've heard several other derivations of that that don't have the same meaning to me when I hear them. But it's kind of like when somebody says out of the box, their thinking is out of the box. Or the proof is in the pudding. Okay, guys, let me go back and tell you about the important part about those two things and how they started. The thinking was not out of the box, because out of the box back in the 80s and 90s meant off the shelf, plain vanilla, might not even have a branding on it. Okay, that's what an out of the box was. Outside the box was you're no longer constrained by 4 sides or 6 sides or 8 sides or whatever it might be. You're outside of that with total freedom, to expand and explore and, try things out. And then the other thing is, the proof is not in the pudding, my friends. It never has been in the pudding. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. That's a very huge distinction, and it's very important to the whole process, which tells you if the proof is in the pudding, you don't even have to have any pudding present. And what good is that if you can't test the pudding, So I really think that it's kind of cool that we've lived long enough, or I've lived long enough, to find the axioms and aphorisms and blah de blah that we were growing up with and took for granted as just part of the background. They're at a point right now where I find it kind of like fingernails on a blackboard. They don't have blackboards much anymore, do they?
Got smart boards now.
Yeah, smart boards and whiteboards and whatever, green boards. So any other thoughts on this one before we kind of wrap up at the top of the half hour and get started on the next segment?
No, I think just it's kind of interesting to listen, to listen to the things that resonate with certain people that they say, and without judgment or anything. Just, isn't it interesting what attracts them, and the things that they use to kind of shorthand, I don't know, define their experience as a human.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool. It's just a fascinating thing.
Yeah. So I guess the last one that I want to do, just to kind of mention before we go, what does this mean to you? Namaste. Bye-bye, folks. We'll be back on the other side. Come see us and listen.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can hear us at exvadio.com/podcasts, Apple Podcasts app, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts.